Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the rise of the Qin dynasty in ancient China.
A fascinating period.
Oh yeah, definitely. We've got some great excerpts from a text that's just overflowing with historical records, tons of analysis. Let me tell you, this period, it's wild. It's full of ambition and conflict and some really remarkable people. We're talking about military masterminds and just crazy strategies and just the fascinating stories of the people who shaped this entire era.
Yeah, it's a period where basically one state, Qin, rose up and just conquered everybody. Unified China under the first emperor.
Exactly.
But it definitely wasn't easy.
Oh, not at all. Not even close. And that's what we're going to be focusing on, how they actually went about conquering these other powerful states, like Wei, for example. And we'll look at some of the decisions made by key players, like Li Xin, the future first emperor.
The man himself.
The man, the myth, the legend. So are you ready to kind of jump in and get started with this?
Let's do it.
All right, so imagine it's 225 BC.
All right.
Yingzheng, not yet emperor, but, well on his way.
He's got that ambition.
Oh, he's got big plans. And he set his sights on the state of Chu. Now, Chu was one of the biggest, most powerful states in all of China at that time. Conquering it would be a huge step towards, unifying everything. But to do that, Yingzheng needed a plan. And he needed a good one. So he calls in his generals for advice, like any good leader should.
Sure.
So this is where we meet Li Xin, this young general. Total rock star reputation, known for speed, decisive victories. He'd led successful campaigns against, smaller forces, and he was just brimming with confidence. So when Yingzheng asked him, hey, how many troops do you think we're going to need to take down Chu? Li Xin, without missing a beat, declares that 200,000 troops will be more than enough.
200,000?
200,000, which is, come on.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. That's a massive city. But was it really enough to take on a state like Chu? Yingzheng wanted a second opinion, which, good on him. Smart move. So he consults another, more seasoned general, Wang Jian. And Wang Jian, he urged caution. He had seen a lot more battles, understood the complexities of large-scale warfare. And he kind of painted a different picture. He advised that they would need at least 600,000 troops for a campaign of this magnitude.
Wow. That's more than triple.
More than triple Li Xin's estimate.
Right.
I mean, it's a huge difference of opinion. And I think it really highlights how, experience and perspective, they can shape strategic thinking.
Yeah, definitely.
So Li Xin, with all his victories against, smaller forces, he might have fallen prey to what we call the anchoring effect, right?
Interesting.
Where his initial estimate that 200,000, it might have become an anchor in his mind, making Wang Jian's higher number just totally unreasonable.
I see.
So Yingzheng, who was known to be decisive, right,
Yeah.
and maybe a little bit swayed by Li Xin's confidence, he decides to take the risk. He sends Li Xin and another general, Meng Wu, off to war with a much smaller force than Wang Jian recommended. Now, we're going to get into the consequences of that decision a little bit later, but while all of this is going down, there's another campaign happening at the same time, and it's a totally different approach to warfare. This one involves Wang Jian's son, Wang Ben.
Okay, a family affair.
Oh yeah, like father, like son. Wang Ben, he was no stranger to military success either. I mean, he'd already proven himself. He'd captured a bunch of cities from the Chu, showing he was a force to be reckoned with. And now he was tasked with conquering the state of Wei, another major player in, ancient China.
Right.
What I think is fascinating about Wang Ben's campaign is that he didn't just rely on brute force.
That's interesting.
He had this really keen understanding of strategy and, a little bit of cunning, maybe.
Yeah, I like it.
I know, right? So Wei had this crazy, elaborate irrigation system, and it was designed to manage the flow of the Yellow River, which of course was essential for, agriculture, life, everything. But Wang Ben, he saw an opportunity.
Oh, what did he do?
Instead of a traditional siege, right?
Yep.
He uses Wei's own irrigation system against them.
Wow.
I know, it's incredible. He diverts the flow of the Yellow River to flood their capital city, Dalian.
That's brilliant.
Talk about adaptability. Strategic thinking. Can you imagine using your enemy's infrastructure against them like that?
I mean, talk about turning the tables. It's amazing.
It's a historical example of turn your weaknesses into strengths. And guess what? It worked. The flooding totally crippled Wei's defenses, led to the fall of their capital. The Wei king, seeing his city completely overwhelmed, surrenders to the Qin forces.
Makes sense. What else could he do at that point?
Right. But here's where things take a little bit of an unexpected turn. Unlike the typical Qin way of doing things where, captured monarchs were usually kept alive and just relocated, the Wei king was executed.
Oh, wow.
I know. And this kind of deviation from the norm raises a lot of questions about Why?
Good film.
Was it revenge? Was it like a calculated move to just completely eliminate any chance of rebellion? Or was there like something else going on that we just don't know about?
It's a real mystery.
It is. It really is. And, you always have to wonder about like the factors that might have been at play that, led to this drastic action.
Right.
Unfortunately, like the historical record, it's not always like perfectly clear, right?
Oh,
And there's different sources that offer slightly different accounts of what actually happened. For instance, like the account we're looking at here suggests that this whole detail about the Wei King's execution might come from a source that's considered less reliable compared to like the records of the Grand Historian, which is generally seen as the most comprehensive and authoritative record, of ancient China. And that source, the records of the Grand Historian, it just mentions the surrender of the Wei King. It doesn't even mention an execution.
So we've got like these different pieces of the puzzle.
We do.
And it's up to, well, I guess historians to try and figure it all out, huh?
Pretty much. And sometimes those pieces just don't fit perfectly. And, I think it's a good reminder that history is often told from like multiple perspectives, and those perspectives can have their own, biases, their own interpretations.
For sure.
Okay, so while the whole debate about the Wei King's fate continues, let's switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
And talk about a historian who gives us like some really amazing insights into why nations rise and fall. Sima Guang, a really famous historian and scholar, he argued that Wei's decline was mostly due to their inability to like attract and manage talent effectively.
Interesting.
Right. Think about it. If a country doesn't have skilled leaders, strategists, innovators, it's going to struggle.
Makes sense.
And what's fascinating is that Sima Guang's observations, they apply directly to the Qin. I mean, they were masters at attracting talent, even from their enemies, which, directly contributed to their rise to power. Like, one example is when the state of Wei, they basically gave the Qin a brilliant strategist named Shang Yang.
Wait, they gave away their best strategist. Why would they do that?
I know, seems a little crazy, right? Like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Shang Yang had fallen out of favor in Wei, but the Qin, they saw his potential, welcomed him, with open arms, and he went on to implement a series of just groundbreaking reforms that transformed the entire Qin state.
Really? What kind of reforms?
Like strengthening the central government, promoting meritocracy, improving agriculture, and like military organization. Big stuff.
Wow. So Wei's loss was Qin's gain. Big time.
Exactly. And these reforms, they played a crucial role in the Qin's like eventual rise to power, laid the foundation for a more efficient, centralized, and, militarily powerful state. And they went on to conquer their rivals.
So it all goes back to Sima Guang's point. The talent management is super important.
Right.
You got to be able to recognize and, nurture the skills of your people if you want to be successful. And it's not just for nations either, businesses too. It's a timeless principle.
A timeless lesson for sure. Still relevant today, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got conquest, intrigue, serious leadership lessons from history. But now let's get into a story that's part history, part legend, completely captivating.
Oh, I like those. Lay it on me.
It's the tale of the Lord of Anling, this little-known ruler of a tiny state. And he finds himself facing the full force of Ying Zheng's ambition. And his response was anything but predictable. So picture this. Ying Zheng, fresh off his victories, right, sends an envoy to the Lord of Anling. Seems like a pretty generous offer, on the surface at least. He proposes a land swap, offering, a much larger territory in exchange for the Lord of Anling's small domain.
Sounds like a good deal, right? More land, more resources.
Right, you'd think so. More power. But the Lord of Anling, in a move that kind of surprised everyone, refuses. He says he's duty-bound to protect the land he inherited from his ancestors, regardless of its size or, perceived value.
Interesting. So he was more about principle than profit.
It seems that way. It raises a lot of questions, though. Was he truly driven by this unwavering loyalty? Or was there like a strategic move there? Was he hoping to leverage his refusal into something better? Or maybe even like trying to inspire some resistance against the Qin?
It's a puzzle for sure.
It really is. And to make things even more intriguing, there's another story from an earlier period that involves a different Lord of Anling, but it has some interesting parallels.
Okay, tell me more.
So this earlier Lord of Anling, he had dealings with a powerful general known as the Lord of Xinling. Now, the Lord of Xinling, he was leading an alliance against the Qin, and he needed to capture a strategic stronghold. And that stronghold, guess who was defending it?
Let me guess. Anling.
Anling, yes.
They're the Anling guys, always in the thick of it.
I know, right? So the Lord of Xinling, he was hoping to use a personal connection, right, to his advantage. So he tries to recruit the defending general's father. And who is that father? None other than the Lord of Anling.
Wow. Talk about family drama.
Right. But just like in the encounter with Ying Zheng, the Lord of Anling stands his ground. He refuses to pressure the general who's defending that stronghold, even though it could have, helped his own state, potentially.
So we've got these two stories, separated by time, both featuring a Lord of Anling standing up to a more powerful force. It makes you wonder.
I know, right? Was there something about the culture or the leadership of Anling that, like, fostered this spirit of independence and defiance? Or were these just isolated incidents, maybe exaggerated in the retelling?
Fascinating. You have to wonder if there was something unique about Anling, something that made them willing to resist, even when the odds were stacked against them.
Right. Or maybe these stories, over time, they've become a little embellished,
Yeah,
to make them seem even more brave and defiant. But either way, it shows just how complex these power dynamics were in ancient China.
absolutely. And there's another layer to this whole Anling saga, the story of Tangju.
Oh, yeah, Tangzhou.
Some historical accounts, like the Strategies of the Warring States, they depict him as this bold envoy sent by Lord of Anling to directly negotiate with Ying Zheng.
Okay.
And they paint him as this incredibly courageous figure. He even draws his sword in front of Ying Zheng, threatening to fight him to the death if Anling's independence is threatened.
Wow. That's intense.
Right. Talk about a dramatic standoff. But as compelling as that story is, it does raise some questions.
Yeah, like would Ying Zheng really allow that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially after, a recent assassination attempt. Would he really let an armed foreign envoy get that close to him? It seems unlikely.
It does make you wonder if maybe this account has been, like, exaggerated over time, to kind of emphasize the bravery of the people of Anling and how they resisted the Qin, because, I mean, everyone loves a good underdog story, right?
Of course, of course.
But even if we set aside the more dramatic parts, the fact that Ying Zheng even considered negotiating with, like, a small entity like Anling is, it's curious.
It is curious.
Why even bother? The king could have easily just taken over.
Mhm.
So was it genuine diplomacy? Was it like a political move to just seem magnanimous, or maybe a way to like avoid conflict and focus on bigger conquests? It's tough to say for sure.
Yeah, we don't have a clear answer from the historical record.
We don't. But there's one theory that I find really intriguing. Maybe the Qin intentionally chose to leave Anling alone as like a symbolic gesture.
Interesting.
Right. Maybe it was a calculated move to show strength and tolerance, which would further solidify their legitimacy as the dominant power,
I like that theory.
It's like saying, look, we're powerful, but we also respect those who choose to peacefully coexist with us. It's a way of saying, we're not just conquerors, we're capable of diplomacy too.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense.
So we have these like contrasting narratives about Anling, right? The brave defiance, the possible political calculations, and then this like ultimate ambiguity of their fate.
Yeah.
And it really highlights how complex it is to interpret history.
For sure.
We're trying to piece together these fragments of information, trying to make sense of the motivations of people who lived centuries ago. It's a challenge, but that's what makes it so rewarding.
It's like a puzzle, but with really high stakes.
Exactly. And the fact that we don't know for sure what happened to Anling makes it even more fascinating. Did they somehow manage to keep their independence against all odds? Or were they eventually absorbed into the growing Qin Empire? It's a question historians still debate, and it's one we'll continue to explore as we keep going with this deep dive into the rise of the Qin dynasty.
Can't wait to see what else we uncover. It really just shows that history isn't just names and dates, So like, it's a tapestry.
Yeah.
Woven from all these choices and actions of people.
I like that. A tapestry.
Yeah. And sometimes we don't know their motivations. We just don't know why.
Right. And speaking of mysteries, let's go back to that campaign against Chu.
Okay.
The one we talked about earlier. Remember, Ying Zheng had gone with Li Xin's kind of more aggressive approach.
Right.
Sending a much smaller force than Wang Jian had advised.
The season general. Yeah. And
well, as you can probably guess that decision, it backfired. Big time.
Okay.
Yeah. Li Xin and Meng Wu, they made progress at first, pushed pretty deep into Chu territory, had a few victories, but it didn't last.
Why not? What happened?
They underestimated their opponent. Li Xin, he was known for those like light and fast attacks.
Right.
But this was different. This campaign, it needed a different approach.
I see.
He was going up against a much larger force, way more organized than he was used to. And the tactics that work so well against smaller opponents, not so much against the full might of the Chu army.
Yeah, sometimes you got to switch it up. Yeah. Adapt.
Exactly. And the Chu, they saw this opportunity, right? Li Xin was overconfident. And they launched this massive counterattack, targeted his supply lines, cut off reinforcements. His army was like totally exposed, vulnerable.
Classic blunder. You got to protect your supply lines.
It really shows you how underestimating your opponent can be disastrous. In war, in life, you've got to assess the situation. Look at it from all angles, Don't let past victories cloud your judgment.
Solid advice.
So the Chu forces, under some pretty skilled generals, by the way, like Shang Yan, they turned the tide of the battle, inflicted heavy losses on the Qin army, forced Li Xin and Meng Wu into a full-on retreat. Their campaign, which had started out so promising, it ended in, defeat.
Wow. Not what Ying Zheng was hoping for, I imagine.
No, not at all. He was not happy.
I bet.
He realized he had made a mistake.
Happens to the best of us.
Right. He had sided with Li Xin's overconfidence. Time to call in the big guns?
Wang Jian.
Wang Jian. The seasoned general whose advice he initially ignored. Wang Jian, even though he's getting up there in years, agreed to lead the army against Chu. But on one condition.
What was it?
He needed the full 600,000 troops he had asked for originally.
Makes sense. He knew what he was doing.
Ying Zheng, humbled by that defeat, agreed right away. No hesitation. He knew everything was riding on this campaign. And what's interesting is that Wang Jian didn't just rush in.
Right.
He knew that this would require patience, strategic maneuvering, deep understanding of the enemy.
He spent months fortifying positions, training troops, gathering intel.
Playing the long game.
Exactly. And it worked. His methodical approach, it paid off. Led the Qin army to victory after victory, just gradually wore down the Chu defenses and weakened their resolve.
Brilliant.
That victory, it was pivotal.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It solidified their dominance over all the other states and basically paved the way for their unification of China.
Wow. So we've seen how strategic thinking, experience, and, a healthy dose of caution can really make all the difference.
For sure. But the Qin dynasty, it's not just military conquests, right? It's also like political maneuvering, cultural shifts, and all the fascinating people. And speaking of fascinating people, remember the Lord of Anling?
The one who stood up to Ying Zheng. Yeah, what about him?
Well, his story, it's one of those historical enigmas we're still guessing, still debating. We talked about how he refused the land swap.
Right.
He chose to keep his ancestral land, even though the Qin were getting stronger and stronger.
But there's more to his story.
Okay, I'm listening.
This is where the line between history and legend, it gets kind of blurry. Some historical accounts, they claim that Ying Zheng was, impressed by his courage and loyalty.
Really?
Yeah, and he decided to honor his decision, leave his little state alone.
Wow, so the mighty conqueror showing respect for the little guy.
Right. Kind of a heartwarming tale, isn't it?
It is. But is it true?
That's the thing. A lot of stories from back then, there's no way to know for sure.
Ah, the mysteries of history.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Could be a true account of, Ying Zheng's good side. Or, maybe it's a story that's been embellished over time to make him seem more benevolent.
That's the challenge, isn't it? Sifting through all the different versions and trying to figure out what really happened.
It is. We have to, weigh the evidence, come to our own conclusions.
And even when we can't say for sure, it's still worthwhile to explore those different interpretations, to engage in that historical debate.
Absolutely. It helps us understand, the nuances of human motivation and see how those ancient stories are still relevant to us today.
They still have something to teach us.
They do. So even though we may never know Anling's ultimate fate, their story is important.
I agree.
It reminds us that even when you're facing overwhelming power, there will always be people who stand their ground, who fight for what they believe in, and leave their mark on history.
Even if it seems small.
Even if it seems small. It's amazing how, even with the gaps and the missing pieces, these stories from ancient China, they still make us think.
Yeah, they really do.
Make us think about, the big picture.
It's the beauty of history. It's not just about the past. It's about how those events, they shape how we see the world today.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into the rise of the Qin dynasty, let's go over the key takeaways one more time.
Sounds good to me.
Where do you want to start?
Well, we started by looking at Li Xin and Wang Jian, their campaigns against Chu.
Right. Xin's overconfidence, his need for speed, it led to,
disaster, total defeat. Whereas Wang Jian, he took his time. He was all about that careful planning, that strategic maneuvering.
And in the end, he won. Sometimes slow and steady is the way to go.
Exactly. And it shows how important experience is. Really understanding your opponent. You can't just rely on what worked before, especially when you're facing a whole new challenge.
You've got to be able to adapt, really look at the situation, adjust your strategy.
And speaking of strategy, remember Wang Ben?
Wang Jian's son. Yeah, what a move he pulled.
I know, right? Using their own irrigation system against them, flooding their capital, crippling their defenses. That was genius.
Pure genius. Thinking outside the box. Sometimes you got to use unconventional methods.
And then we had Sima Guang talking about talent, how important it is to nurture it, manage it.
Right. Wang lost Sheng Yang, their best strategist, and it really hurt them in the end.
And Qin.
Yeah.
They embraced his talent. And look what happened. They rose to power.
It's such a crucial lesson, even today. If you want to succeed, you need the right people, and you got to know how to use their skills.
Absolutely.
And of course, there's the Lord of Anling.
Ah, yes. The man of mystery.
Standing up to Ying Zheng, holding on to his ancestral lands.
So much about his story is still unclear.
Right. What was he thinking? Could he really resist the Qin? Did he just want to inspire others? Or was it all about tradition, about independence.
We may never know for sure.
But his story is a reminder that even when things seem impossible, even when you're up against huge odds, there are people who will still stand up for what they believe in.
And they leave their mark on history.
Exactly. And sometimes those marks, they might seem small, but they can have a lasting impact.
Think about it. His story is a tiny piece of this huge puzzle, but it tells us something really important about the human spirit, about our desire for freedom, for staying true to ourselves.
So as we leave behind the battlefields and the political intrigue of the Qin dynasty, I want to leave you all with this.
Okay, what's that?
The Qin didn't just rise to power because of their military.
Right.
They were strategic. They knew how to play the game. And they adapted.
Like we were talking about, it's not just about brute force. You got to be smart about it.
Exactly. And just like those ancient rulers, we face challenges today. And those challenges, they need us to think critically, to be resourceful, to never underestimate what humans can do.
History is full of examples of that.
It is. And remember, history isn't just something we read about. It's a conversation. It's a way for us to connect with the past and learn from it.
So keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep the conversation going.
Well said. Until our next deep dive, thanks for listening.